Good morning, all. As always, happy to be with the church, happy to see each other.
Yeah.
That's right. Lord wouldn't have it any other way.
It's like Willie said, we love each other.
That's right, little sister Willie. So, welcome to our adult Sunday school class for Sunday, June 9th, second Sunday of the month. We are going through the Bible timeline. We have arrived at Exodus chapter 10. So that's where we will be kicking off. We are in the year 1446 BC. So by this point in time, the Israelites have been in Egypt for 215 years, been enslaved for 99 years, about 100. This time frame is referred to as Middle Bronze Age, 2B. At the point in time that this is happening in the Bible, way over in China, they're being ruled by Emperor Wai Ren of their Shang dynasty, their second dynasty after the Xia dynasty. Egypt is being ruled by Pharaoh Dudamos II. Dudamos II is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. He is part of their 13th dynasty, and this is in Egypt's second intermediate period. It's after the Middle Kingdom with Joseph's Pharaoh, Amenemhat the third, and all those. It's before the New Kingdom with King Tut and Ramses and all those. So we're in between. Also in the Bible lands, Babylon is being ruled by King Amidatana, who's the great-grandson of Hammurabi. And about this time frame in the line of Christ, the tribe of Judah, I put Aminadab at about 98 years old right now. His son Nation, I guess about 39 years old. He'll be the leader of the tribe of Judah heading on out. So some things we ended class with last week, I wanted to refresh and touch on a little more. Here's a better image than I originally had of Neferhotep I. This is the Pharaoh from Exodus 1 verse 15. This is the guy who gave instruction to the midwives to kill the boys. If the child is born and it's a boy, to kill it. That's the guy who gave that order. Then we have, let's see here, this guy, Sobek-hotep IV. This is the guy following after him who told everyone that all the males born to Egypt must be thrown into the Nile River. This is also the same guy, Sobek-hotep IV. This is the guy, the Pharaoh in the south, who married the daughter of the Pharaoh in the north. In the north, they were more integrated with the Hebrews, intermarrying, even in the royal line. And so the Pharaoh of the north, Pantanjau, his daughter Merit, daughter of Pharaoh in the north, married the daughter of Pharaoh in the south, sort of bringing north and south together. So, what's that?
One of it was the son, they were both daughters.
Who?
Was married.
Oh, what did I say?
No.
Daughter married daughter. Is
No.
that what you're saying?
Yes.
Oh, daughter married Pharaoh. Yeah, thank you for the clarification. Yes, the daughter, see, that's why I need you all here to keep me straight. And because I hate when I go back and I critique the recordings afterwards, I go, I said Peter, I meant Paul. I mean, I know y'all knew I meant Paul, but I hate when I do that, so.
The son, whichever kingdom it was going to be ruling later.
Yeah, exactly.
That area, so which was which?
Yeah, so we have Pharaoh Sobek-hotep IV in the south. We got Pharaoh Pantanjau in the north, and he'd been intermixing with the Hebrews and had the Hebrew blood in him as well. His daughter in the north, Merit. So Pharaoh's daughter of Pharaoh in the north, married the Pharaoh of the south, Sobek-hotep IV. Married him. Yeah. So she, at the same time, is daughter of Pharaoh, the Pharaoh in the north. She's also wife of Pharaoh, Pharaoh in the south. And Sobek-hotep IV, through this marriage alliance, begins to dominate all of Egypt, north and south. Or as they would say, Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north, because the Nile goes from bottom to top, south to north. This Sobek-hotep IV, who issued the baby boy death decree, throw them all in the Nile, is the same one who raised a Hebrew baby boy who came through the Nile, across the Nile River in a basket, to his wife, Merit, who was the daughter of the Pharaoh of the north, Pantanjau. Yeah. So that's this guy. This is the guy who raised Moses. So what we have here, kind of help break it down. We're going to go from bottom to top. I guess we're going to pretend we're like the Nile. So down here, we've got the 12th dynasty. This is kind of a zoom out big picture of what we're looking at. Got the 12th dynasty of Egypt here with Amenemhat III, who's the pharaoh who had the dreams that Joseph interpreted. Of course, we got Joseph here, also known as Agu or Anea. He is the one who lives. So Amenemhat in this high point of the Middle Kingdom, 12th dynasty. His daughter becomes pharaoh after him, Sobek Neferu. So after she dies, there's no one else in the royal line to continue. And so from the 12th dynasty, now we have the 13th dynasty that we're in right now. So Joseph dies. We have Hammurabi of Babylon. Moses is born. We have these two pharaohs we just looked at, Neferhotep I and Sobek-hotep IV. Sobek-hotep IV raises Moses. So this is all 13th dynasty. This red box is where we are right now. So we've got Dudamos, the pharaoh of Egypt at the time of the Exodus. So here we are here. So what's going to happen? Let's look ahead to see what's going to happen. Big picture. So the Exodus has a major impact on Egypt, as we would expect. It basically brings about the end of the 13th dynasty. So we see the 13th dynasty continuing a little bit here with some overlap. But what happens is the collapse of the 13th dynasty paves way for outsiders to come in and rule. These outsiders are known as Hyksos. We have two different groups. This first group comes in, we've got a pharaoh named Seshi. He's in the Bible. He's actually ruling from Hebron. And he actually is chased out of Hebron by Caleb and during the conquest period here. And he goes back to Sherahan, rules from there. So but he's able to rule Egypt remotely because it's so weakened. Meanwhile, the native pharaohs are pushed further down to the south. So while you've got this new group ruling in the north, so after 13th, they become the 14th dynasty. And then so we've got over here, then after the 13th dynasty falls out, we've got the 15th dynasty. So these are the native Egyptians. These in blue are the outsiders, the Hyksos. So we go from 13th to 14th and 15th at the same time. Well, what happens then is later on, there's going to be another dynasty, the 15th dynasty. So I've got, 13, 14, 15, 16th dynasty will be up here, the native Hebrews. And then the next group of outsiders will be the 17th dynasty. There's the lesser Hyksos, the early Hyksos, and then the greater Hyksos or the later Hyksos. So we go 12, Middle Kingdom. Now we're in the second intermediate period, which is all this, 13th dynasty, 14th dynasty outsiders, 15th dynasty, local Egyptians pushed down south, followed by their 16th dynasty. Then the next big group of the outsider Hyksos is the 17th dynasty. And then what finally happens is the native Egyptians rise up, chase out the Hyksos, have a united Egypt again, and that begins the 18th dynasty and the New Kingdom and everything that happens after that. So this is all that second intermediate period. And here's where we are right in the middle here with Pharaoh Dudamos II and the Exodus. So that's kind of a big picture of where we've been, where we are, where we're going. Question, Sister Diana. Ramses is way up in the New Kingdom. Not even yet. So the New Kingdom starts right here after 1200 BC. Right now we're in the 1400s BC. So we got 200 more years of this second intermediate period before the New Kingdom rises up. Spoiler alert, Ramses is not the pharaoh of the Exodus. He is the pharaoh of Solomon's son Rehoboam, called in the Bible Shishak. Pharaoh Ramses, no one ever called him Ramses. That's a Greek version of his name. The Egyptians had nicknames. You've heard me use the word hypochoristicon. It's a long word that means short. No, go figure. So there's a shortening of a name. Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria, Pul. There's a question about that being a shortening of his name. Jonathan, John, that's a hypochoristicon. And so for Ramses, his full name is like Rameshia, da 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 da. Well, the Egyptians actually called him like Shisha or something like that, very similar to the Shishak in the Bible. Now, one of the whole reasons why the accepted Egyptian timeline is so wrong is because an innocently intending guy, I believe it was Champion, the same guy who discovered the Rosetta Stone, that cracked the code for us with hieroglyphs, He saw in the Egyptian, writings and stuff and their monuments that there's a pharaoh named Shishak who went up into the promised land. Well, we know from the Bible with Solomon's son Rehoboam that Pharaoh Shishak went up into the promised land, took the temple goods from Jerusalem's temple and came back home. Well, they both went up to the promised land. Their names are so close. That's got to be the same guy. So the whole reason that Pharaoh Shishak outside the Bible is given the date he's given is because of the Bible. It's because of their thinking of who he was in the Bible, but they got it wrong. Yeah, there's a misunderstanding. But the whole reason for the secular date is based on the Bible, but getting the Bible wrong. When you actually drill into Shishak and his itinerary into the promised land, he never goes to Jerusalem. Shishak in the Bible went to Jerusalem and specifically took the temple treasures. God even told Solomon's son Rehoboam, you're going to learn the difference between serving me and serving these other nations. Scary statement. And so to point your question about Ramses, he is actually Shishak. He is actually the one who went into Jerusalem and took the temple treasures. He's not the Pharaoh of the Exodus. He's the Pharaoh of Solomon's son who took the temple treasures from Jerusalem and brought them back to Egypt. So that's Ramses. So he's in the 930s BC, thereabouts. So, and that's all New Kingdom. King Tut is before that in the New Kingdom. King Tut is actually during the time of David. And we'll get to all that when we get there. But so all that's good stuff to look forward to come. And so again, so we've got, again, here's Pharaoh Neferhotep I, who was the one who told the midwives to kill the babies if they're boys when they're born. This is Sobek-Hotep IV, who married the other Pharaoh's daughter, who discovered Moses. This is the guy who had the baby boy death decree, throw them all in the Nile, and ended up raising Moses. And so this is where we are right now in the 13th dynasty, in the second intermediate period after the Middle Kingdom, before the New Kingdom. We're in this red box here, Pharaoh Dudimos II of Exodus, right here, and the 13th dynasty is going to collapse. We'll have 14th dynasty of outsiders come in, then the local native Egyptians will continue into 15th dynasty and go on from there. So that is all that. We left off at with the Hebrews in Exodus chapter 10. So we'll pick that up here. Let's go to this. So now we're talking about the locusts. So locusts actually were in the news. Let's see here. 17-year cicada decides to return to hibernation after emerging beneath a pride parade. This is a joke, of course. He'd been gone for 17 years. So he comes back and, yeah, no thanks, I'll go back. That's a joke courtesy of Babylon B. But we're dealing with the plague of locusts. Yeah, you know. So locusts like this guy, locusts like this guy. This is what we're talking about here. So let's read. We left off in Exodus chapter 10. Let's refresh Exodus 10, starting in verse 1. Now, counting down the 40 days that are mapped out by Dr. Floyd Nolan Jones here, we're on day 24 of the 40 of this period of the 10 plagues. So day 24, Tuesday, April 7th of 1446 BC, Exodus chapter 10, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, so that I may perform these signs of mine among them. And that you may tell in the presence of your son and of your grandson how I made a mockery of the Egyptians and how I performed my signs among them, so that you may know that I am the Lord. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, so that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your territory, and they will cover the surface of the land, so that no one will be able to see the land. They will also eat the rest of what has survived, what is left to you from the hail, and they will eat from every tree of yours, which grows in the field. Then your houses will be filled with them, together with the houses of all your servants, and the houses of all the Egyptians, something which neither your fathers nor your grandfathers have seen, from the day that they came upon the earth until this day. And he turned and left Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh's servant said to him, how long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the people go, so that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not yet realize that Egypt is destroyed? So Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and he said to them, go serve the Lord your God. Who specifically are the ones who are going? Moses said, we shall go with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters, with our flocks and our herds we shall go, for we must hold a feast to the Lord. Then he said to them, so may the Lord be with you when I let you and your little ones go. Watch out, for evil is on your mind. Not so. Go now, but only the men among you, and serve the Lord, since this is what you desire. So they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. Verse 12. Then the Lord said to Moses, reach out with your hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, so that they may come up on the land of Egypt and eat every plant of the land, everything that the hail has left. So Moses reached out with his staff over the land of Egypt. The Lord directed an east wind on the land all that day and all that night. And when it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts. And we'll pause there. So right at the beginning, we see God saying, again in verse 1 of chapter 10, I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants. We've talked about Pharaoh's free will and then God sealing it off after he's had time. And again, in verse 2, God's doing these tell your sons, just as Joshua said, tell your sons, that so that you may know. There's a reason why God does what he does, when he does what he does, how and with who he does it. So God is very intentional and purposeful always. Nothing random about God. So they go have this conversation. I'm sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Is there a significant plan?
We're going to talk about that. Great question. So Brother Clay asked about the direction, mentioning the east. And so that is going to come up, especially with the removal of the locusts. So, and all of this kind of shows us where all the help, these clues in the Bible help us understand where this actually happened and how this actually happened, what God did and where he did it. And just shows us again, the powerful truth and reality of this all. None of this is make-believe, as we know. In verse 7 of chapter 10, Pharaoh's servant said to him, how long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the people go, so that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not yet realize Egypt is destroyed? Wow. You're telling the guy who's in charge of the country that you've just lost your country. They're basically, Pharaoh's servants are telling him, look, we're done for. We're toast. Why are you still doing this? They won. Their God has won. Defeated all our gods up to this point. Why are you being stubborn and holding out? Nothing more good is going to come of this. This is only going to get worse for us. Enough. Give up, give in, let them have whatever they want. Just so Pharaoh's own servants are telling him this. Now, I've got people like you to keep me straight on when I'm saying the word daughter, or when I'm saying the word Pharaoh. Pharaoh's got his advisors to help keep him straight. Does he listen to them? No, because already his heart is done. And we see that. So what else from this passage? I'll share, you don't have to turn there, it's one verse, but talking about locusts, and again, our tie-ins to the Exodus and Revelation. Revelation 9, verse 3 tells us, Revelation 9:3, then out, this is the fifth trumpet, out of the smoke came locusts upon the earth, and power was given them, as the scorpions of the earth have power, and on from there. So yeah, no thanks. So there's a connection, and we've seen multiple, and we're not done yet, connections between Exodus and Revelation. And there's, again, God is purposeful. The things he does in the past, he's going to bring back around in the near future. And he's the same God in the present, taking us from past to future. So if we recognize his work in the past, we'll understand and see his work taking us into that future. So that's what I have initially on those verses. Any reactions, questions on Exodus 10, 1 through 13? And we'll get to the direction in a bit here. All good so far? Yeah, Sister Peggy.
scorpions are poisonous.
Oh, yeah.
and Locusts are not.
Yeah.
So does that mean divine, he made them venomous?
Possible. That's one application that God is capable of doing. Or it could be that their power is in devouring. So it could be just as there's the power of the poison of the scorpion in the venom, that similar to that power, that their power of destruction. In the book of Joel, it opens up with the plague of locusts. And what the locust who does this leaves, the locust who does that will take. What the locust who does that leaves, the locust who does this will take. And that's why when he says in Joel, I will make up to you for the years, he's referring to the years that the devouring locust and the swarming locust that they all destroyed. Oh, yeah, exactly. Great question, great point. Absolutely. So we see that this happened over the course of the night, brings us to the next day. We're on day 25, which is Wednesday, April 8th, 1446 BC. Again, from verse 13. So Moses reached out with his staff over the land of Egypt. The Lord directed east wind on the land all that day, all that night. When it was morning, now we're Wednesday morning, the east wind brought the locusts. Verse 14. The locusts came up over all the land of Egypt and settled in all the territory of Egypt. They were very numerous. There had never been so many locusts, nor would there be so many again. For they covered the surface of the whole land, so that the land was darkened. And they ate every plant of the land, and all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Therefore, nothing green was left on tree or plant of the field throughout the land of Egypt. Wow. So that's a big deal. So this was pretty devastating, pretty effective. There's the idea of surviving one calamity only to fall into another. There's passages in scripture, some prophecies where I forget exactly how it works, but he who escapes this will be bitten by a snake, or he who escapes that will put his hand in the wall and it will fall through. So kind of like those horror movies, Final Destination. Oh, you cheated death once, but guess what? Death's going to still come after you. That old concept here. And so bigger than karma or anything like that, God's truth prevails. And what didn't happen with the pestilence on the animals was hit by the hail, that when they didn't bring stuff in when they were warned. And then what the hail didn't get, the locusts got. So nothing is going to be left untouched. No one's going to be left untouched. And they didn't have freezers back then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here comes the Iceman.
Well, once those locusts are eaten, there's nothing left for the people.
Yeah,
It's starvation city.
exactly. That's why this is so devastating and humbling and shows our dependency. And this is why they are so desperate and why they have all these different gods for all these different things to try to keep them appeased and happy.
Well, there were Hebrews who went down to Egypt because they were starving in Israel. So, yeah.
Egypt was the breadbasket.
It was. They do rely on having food for themselves and other people.
Yeah. So they can't provide for themselves or anyone else and benefit from that. Brother Peter.
So, I know that they eat the same thing in those.
Crickets, locusts, they're different species, but similar. I don't know where their union comes on because it goes kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So where locusts and crickets meet up, going up that line, I'm not sure, but very similar.
But they see like a plague that comes and they devour it, but like they do there's the same thing as the katies or the
Cicadas, katydids,
and then they're eating those guys. I'm like, okay, so are they eating the locusts too? They might, they gotta live.
yeah. There's a question about the good news is this plague doesn't last long. So the locusts aren't going to be around for them to chew on. So there was no World Economic Forum or United Nations telling them to eat the bugs.
That is true.
Yeah, there was actually, there's been a question raised with John the Baptist eating locusts and wild honey, because there's also a flower that fits that description as well. Was he eating the flowers and the wild honey, or was he actually eating the bugs? Either way, it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Sister Peggy.
they were there for them to try. And she said it actually tastes like peanut butter.
I imagine it's the crunchy, not the smooth. Creamy. John the Baptist, yeah. I like peanut butter and honey, locust and honey. Yeah,
Is that
I need some extra honey, but yeah.
make something that you would taste very good.
Yeah.
Taste, and it's protein.
Cricket's hot, that's why it's called Skippy. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Look at those ingredients again. And these locusts came in a jiffy. I'll work on that one. The pan was one of the many gods worshipped, yes. Yeah. I would not have thought of locusts tasting like peanut butter. They did not taste like chicken, okay. Oh, I love it, yeah.
And one is energy and one is full protein.
There we go. Good stuff. Good stuff. So things you never would have thought of otherwise. Yeah, but we see it all kind of fitting. So now we get to a very key pivotal moment. We're actually going to borrow from Exodus 12 here and then continue in Exodus 10. This next day, Thursday, April 9th, is going to be the start of something very new here. Let's go to Exodus 12, verses 1 and 2. Thursday, April 9th, 1446 BC, Exodus 12, 1 and 2. Now the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year for you. This is the month that's referred to as Abib, or also referred to as Nisan. So this day right here that we're continuing on, he'll go on from there later on in Exodus 12, but we're tying this in here with Exodus 10. This is that spot. This is day one of their new year. Thursday, April 9th will be Nisan 1. On the Hebrew Jewish calendar, their first month is Abib or Nisan. So they've got 12 months. It's a lunar calendar. So some months have 29 days, some have 30 days. And every so often, like we have a leap year, they have a leap month. Their last month of the year is Adar. And so they add an Adar 2 month every so often to get it to line up. It's called a Metonic cycle, named for the Greek guy who discovered it. But basically every 19 years, the solar calendar lines up with the lunar calendar. And so, yeah. So the number 19 has a lot of different significances with that. But so here we are. This is the kickoff. This is day one of the month of Nisan. Now, what's interesting about this is we're used to, especially with our Wednesday night studies, talking about Shemitas and Sabbaths and Jubilees and all this stuff, and talking about Yom Kippur and all these things, Rosh Hashanah. Rosh means head. It's beginning of is in the month Tishri, about September, October time. We're here at the time of the Exodus in March, April timeframe. In fact, we're right now, based on lining up calendars, this would be about Thursday, April 9th. Well, if the first of the Jewish year is in March, April on our schedule, why do we have Rosh Hashanah in September, October? That is their month of Tishri, the 7th month. That's because we'll see in the law of Moses, the Lord lays out, there's a sacred calendar that they go by. And so the 7th month, that first day, Tishri the 1st, is Rosh Hashanah, the beginning, the head. And then 10 days later, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, is on the 10th of Tishri and on from there. So they've got that calendar going from Tishri to the month before it, Elul, so that 12-month cycle. But then you've got this cycle going from Nisan or Abib to Adar. So what's funny too, when they're doing things according to the Tishri calendar, they don't call Tishri the 1st month, even though it's the beginning of that year cycle. They still call it the 7th month. They always refer to the number of the month based with Nisan Abib being the 1st month. So they've got 2 different calendars going on. They're basically their social one, civil one, and then their religious one. So when we read things in the Bible about the years of the kings and all that stuff, we try to fit it to make sense. one of the questions we have to ask ourselves. Were they dating the kings based on the Tishri cycle or on the Nisan, Abib cycle? Sometimes they did one, sometimes they did the other. Israel was doing this, the kingdom of Judah was doing that. And then sometimes when they were all being buddy-buddy, they'd line up and do the same thing. Then when they got mad, they split, they go back to their own count. So yeah, when people say that the Bible is wrong because Chronicles and Kings is just a mess, no, you just have to do a little unpacking and see how things were set up and how they were doing things. It all fits, of course, as we would only expect it to. A little complicated, yeah, but it all fits. And these Jewish, Hebrew priests and scribes and scholars, they knew what they were doing. They knew how they were conducting themselves. They knew how they were recording their actions. They were faithful. They were consistent. It all fits. It all works. We just have to adapt ourselves to understand the context. So I know that was kind of a lot, but this is a big deal here with the introduction of the calendar. Now, the only time calendar dates are mentioned prior to this is in Genesis with the flood. Now, was that a different calendar? My thought is the same guy who is given this and records this in Exodus, Moses, is the same guy who recorded Genesis. My personal belief is that, because especially since we're not given any other calendar to go by, is that Moses was equating, and he's writing for his contemporaries, the people around him. Moses is recording Genesis for them and generations after them to understand based on their understanding. Just like how sometimes when names of cities change, they'll update the name of the city to make sense to the people in the present time. So too, I believe Moses took what God and the Holy Spirit inspired him, and with their passed down oral history, that Moses gave the dates for the flood in Genesis on the calendar based on the calendar the people recognized and were familiar with. The calendar we're given here with Abib, Nisan being the first month. So my take so far. So I could be wrong, but that's my understanding. Yeah. So here we are, Abib, Nisan the 1st, day 26 of the 40 days of these plagues, Thursday, April 9th. Let's pick up in Exodus 10, verse 16. Exodus 10, 16. Then Pharaoh hurriedly called for Moses and Aaron, and he said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. So now, please forgive my sin only this once, and plead with the Lord your God that he would only remove this death from me. Then he left Pharaoh and pleaded with the Lord. So the Lord shifted the wind to a very strong sea wind, which picked up the locusts and blew them toward Boundary Sea. Not one locust was left in all the territory of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the sons of Israel go. Now, your verse 19 may read very differently from what I just said. We'll talk about that. So let's talk about that. First of all, Red Sea is nowhere in the Hebrew Bible. Where we get Red Sea is when the Hebrew was first translated ever into another language. It was translated into Greek, and that was the time frame in between the Old and New Testaments. The Old Testament was translated from Hebrew into Greek in the 200s BC, when all the world was under the Greek influence, being Hellenized. And when the Greek translators came to Yam Suf, which is the Hebrew words there, they assumed it was referring to what they understood to be the Red Sea. So they didn't translate Yam and Suf are Hebrew words that mean something. They didn't translate the words. They just replaced those Hebrew words with a geographical name of something they assumed it was talking about, which it turns out is not the case. Yeah.
That also, like you were explaining your thoughts on.
Yeah.
Helping the understand.
Yeah.
Making it,
Great point.
that could also.
Yeah. Yeah, we're translating it for people to understand. So this is the Red Sea that we understand. So we know it's not the Mediterranean, and the other big sea is the Red Sea. So that's got to be it. So yeah, you're exactly right. And one of the things is, I'll say now, based on my studies, I believe that the Exodus Sea crossing was at the Gulf of Aqaba, and we see how the Red Sea splits off. You've got the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba, and in between them is the Sinai Peninsula. The Gulf of Aqaba wasn't discovered until like 200 years ago. Even after Magellan and everything, they didn't know the Gulf of Aqaba. It's not on the maps. So no one knew it to refer to it or consider it as a possibility. And by the time in the 1800s, everyone was so convinced with the Red Sea, whether it's Gulf of Suez or whatever they thought, that it was so embedded that it was kind of too late for anyone to take seriously the thought that it could actually have been the Gulf of Aqaba all along. And we'll see the different supports. One of the things I'm not going to do, I don't want to bog down class chasing down all the different reasons why all these different theories are wrong or don't add up. No. I'm going to show what I believe is the accurate and correct one based on what's closest to the Bible. And again, as I study these things out and follow different people, I follow someone just as long as I believe what they're saying jives with the Bible. And anytime they veer off, I leave them and stick with the Bible. I haven't found one source that I agree with completely on anything other than the Bible. And again, I'm sure I'm wrong on some things, but I'm going to do my best to share with you my understanding of what is right according to the Bible and the best presentation, the best option given that most fits the Bible. That makes sense? Yeah, Brother Clay.
Okay, what about body of water?
Yeah.
that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Was it to the east or the west of where the Pharaoh was?
To the east, and that's exactly where we're going.
Because where I used to live, the locusts, and see that the way they got brand, the buzzing ones,
Yeah.
there were times they're definite, but they came in with the east wind.
Interesting.
Because the wind from the east brought humidity.
Ah,
And then at the end of August, September, we started in the west winds. And that would dry, they blow the humidity out, and then it's better for the weather, you tolerate dry heat a lot better than humidity. And I always associated the locusts with humid weather, and
Sure.
that's why I was wondering, you brought them in from the east,
mm-hmm.
with that was a natural.
Yeah.
It was a natural occurrence, but he just brought more.
He cranked it up. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's the great, I love that. I'm so glad you shared that. The cool thing about God is he can do it any way he wants.
Right.
He can do there, like I say, there are basically in the field of study of miracles, there are basically two different types. What's referred to as constellation miracles, or they call them violation miracles. Some of us don't like that phrase. I'll say overriding. Constellation miracles is their miraculous timing of all these different aspects all brought together at the exact moment that they needed to be. And that had to be planned from the start too. So that's miraculous. I've got no problem giving God glory for that. That doesn't rob me of faith for that to naturally fall into place. I think God orchestrates that. But then there are what's referred to as violation miracles, where laws of nature, laws of physics are just absolutely violated. It's no constellation. It's not just things come together. This is going against everything that normally naturally happens. Water into wine, perfect example. I believe that the parting of the Exodus Sea is nothing but a supernatural occurrence. There is no constellation putting together of anything that would cause that to happen, especially when we get there and see the volume involved and the scope of this. And I think that was God's point. God's whole point was this ain't things naturally come together, because some people who are ambiguous about God or kind of hesitant, they're more likely to accept, okay, a natural thing, maybe that's all a bunch of coincidences lining up, God could use, but they can't go to the step of such a big supernatural thing that leaves no choice but to believe God did it. They can't go that far. And you're respecting people where they're at different convictions, but I think that's exactly why God did this. And if we follow what the Bible actually says, we can't help but come to the conclusion it was nothing short of a supernatural intervention, intervening against the natural laws that he set up anyway, that he has dominion over.
Because it's impossible.
Yes. Absolutely. For nothing is impossible with God.
That's what that we're looking at is.
Yes.
Right. And if we get it, that we're keeping the eye on the Lord.
Yeah, great point. Thank you so much for that, Peter. Let me get some closing thoughts here on the locust, and we'll end class with this. So this is from Dr. Glenn Fritz, who I think he's got the best case for this where I differ with him, being a geologist. He doesn't follow the young earth thing. He thinks, millions of years and all that. So I don't follow him there, but I agree with this here. So here's some thoughts on this. The Bible never uses a definitive article, the, with Yam Suf. When you see Red Sea in the Old Testament, it's the Hebrew Yam Suf. They never say the Yam Suf. It's just Yam Suf. So it's not like it's the Reed Sea or the Sea of the End or the Red Sea. It's just Yam Suf. So there's that. Based on the Hebrew grammar, the Suf word family meaning and the geographical context of Yam Suf, we're going to look at all of this. Its likely translations are sea of ending or sea of boundary. You're going to hear me refer to it as boundary sea. Well, when you read Red Sea in your Old Testament, I'm going to say boundary sea. This verse, Exodus 10:19, marks the very first appearance of Yam Suf in the Bible. So it's never been mentioned before. Here's this, getting to Brother Clay's question on the directions. The locust plague affected all of Egypt. So here's where most of the action is happening. But this is all, here's the Nile where most people are living, but this is all of Egypt. The locust plague affected all of Egypt, not just up here where the main action was happening. So it involved both upper and lower Egypt. The locusts were brought in by an east wind and may have originated in the Sinai Peninsula. See, here is the Red Sea. Here's the Gulf of Aqaba. Here's the Gulf of Suez Canal up here. And here's Egypt and then everything else over here. So Moses, his exile travels when he left Egypt and then came back, that would have led him past the head of the Gulf of Aqaba twice. So he left Egypt, came over here to Midian, then he came back as God sent him after the burning bush. So he's familiar, Moses is familiar with the Gulf of Aqaba. He's familiar with the Yam Suf. And that would explain it being used by Moses as an Eastern landmark. He's making this a reference point in Exodus 10:19. Yam Suf was the most eastern and southern landmark cited in the Bible. So here's the issue with this locust thing and how it helps us understand better. The main problematic idea is that locusts were blown or cast into the Yam Suf, but that's not what the Hebrew says. In reality, the Hebrew states that they are merely blown toward Yam Suf, in the direction of. The phrase into the Red Sea is an erroneous translation of the underlying Yama Suf. The word Yama literally means seaward, in the direction of the sea. There is no Hebrew biblical indication that the locusts ever arrived at Yam Suf. The Bible translator convention, you see here where in verse 19, a very strong, I said sea wind, but lots of our Bibles say west wind. The Bible translator convention, the habit of translating yam here as west. Where does that come from? Because most of the time they're writing from up here. What's the sea to the west? The Mediterranean Sea. So when they talk about the sea, they kind of interchange to the west as towards the sea. Sometimes when Sister Ashley and I are talking about directions, east or west, okay, you're talking towards the mountains or towards the Pacific Ocean. It's the same thing. So they were in the habit of west and sea swapping out. But here in what we're talking about, we're not talking about the Mediterranean Sea. That's to the north. So this was not a west wind. This was a sea wind. Towards the direction of the sea. It wasn't a sea direction. It wasn't a west direction. It was a sea direction. So west does not make sense here in that translation. It can't be. So what's all this mean? A careful reading of the Bible text and applying basic geometry here mandate that Yam Suf was a landmark distant from Egypt. Exodus 10:19 cannot refer to a Yam Suf that is located in the immediate vicinity of Egypt. Those who can't handle a big supernatural sea crossing, they say it was either towards the tip here of the Gulf of Suez or in the Bitter Lakes, northern lakes up here. It is a swampy, lakey thing. It wasn't a big sea. That's how they kind of try to naturally justify, which makes no sense because the Egyptians could just go around. But anyway. But here's a problem. Here's scripture showing us why that doesn't work. And that's what this illustrates here. Egypt, Exodus 10:19 cannot refer to a Yam Suf located in the immediate vicinity of Egypt. That's what this is showing here. If this were really what it was talking about versus here, what the Bible says. It cannot refer to a Suf located in this immediate vicinity of Egypt, including the Gulf of Suez, which would require multiple wind vectors. The locusts were in all the land of Egypt, all the land of Egypt. For a wind to blow the locusts away, from here towards the Red Sea, towards the quote unquote Yam Suf, if that's where it's claimed to be, wind would have to go in that direction. To blow the locusts out of here, the wind would have to go in this direction. To blow the locusts out of here, it would have to go in that direction. So you've got multiple wind vectors here, if that's where the Yam Suf is. But the Bible doesn't say all these multiple directions. It says one direction. Well, how can we make that make sense? Well, if the Gulf of Aqaba is the Yam Suf, it's all blowing towards the Yam Suf. It's all blowing one direction, toward the west. It's a west wind.
It's towards the west.
I'm sorry, this is towards the east, yeah. This is actually going from the west to the east. It's going east towards the, yes, from the west. Very strong sea wind. It's a wind blowing towards the sea, towards the Gulf of Aqaba. They're blown to, the wind came from the west to blow them away to the east. They're going from west to east toward the Yam Suf, not landing in the Yam Suf, but toward the Yam Suf. So the Bible describes the prevailing sea wind as shifting from the west, blowing the locust eastward toward Yam Suf, Gulf of Aqaba. Moses, writing this, recording this, used Yam Suf as the furthest known landmark to the east. That's the direction the locusts were blown. It doesn't make, the Yam Suf can't be up here. You need multiple different wind directions to blow the locusts towards that. But if this is the Yam Suf, you need one direction, blow the locusts away from Egypt towards that, you're good. Everything fits, easy peasy. Sister Ashley.
I was just looking here, looking up locusts. And it said that there's not really any distinction on the, whatever you were saying, that genus.
Oh, the type of locust?
They're
Yeah.
grasshoppers.
Yeah.
But when they come together to swarm, they actually change color.
Oh,
They go from this green to kind of the beigey brown. So they kind of morph. And it said here that they're coming together as a cohesive unit, because normally they're solitary. So it is definitely this big.
oh yeah, it shut out the sun.
event. Yeah,
brought darkness.
right, yeah, it's this big thing, and then of course it talks about how it's only under very certain circumstances that this happens.
Yeah,
Basically, the planets have to align, and it has to do with, you know, humidity and food and, you know, and all this stuff. And then it affects all the little chemicals in their brain, but they actually change the way they look.
oh,
You know, they look, you know.
they put on their uniform.
Yeah, it showed the picture.
For going into the, yeah.
Grasshopper, then as a locust, they kind of get more streamlined looking, you know. Yeah,
The aerodynamic to fly together. Yeah,
And it even talked about how even now, as we can see, they can do some things with pesticides and stuff, but it's not, they can only control it so much. There's only
Yeah.
so much they can do. You know, because it's such a big, I guess, just nature, you know,
Yeah.
it's just nature. You still have these swarms and plagues, you know, even today. You know, so it's a big, yeah, it's a big deal. But yeah, they're, so when we say locusts, they're grasshoppers.
Did they mention anything about the Mormon crickets?
No, this is just on the locust.
Okay, that you would think is a plague also, which I've seen in rural Nevada.
oh wow,
They've got a separate thing here on the, you know, different species in different parts of the world, because there's like desert ones and there's ones in Australia. Ooh, I bet the ones in Australia, everything's big in Australia. You know,
that's not a knife.
yeah, you know, there's one of Madagascar, there's a rice, you know, there's a rice locust, there's Rocky Mountain locust, you know, so maybe they talk about that, you know.
Is there a certain size?
There-
There's very size.
I think it's more kind of like zombies. It's more the multitude than the individuals. Yeah,
In our backyard, we have some big ones like this.
Yeah, oh yeah, they're no joke.
There was a recent plague that lasted like 3 years in Africa. I mean, so
Wow.
this is a big, this is a,
These,
day.
normally they would fly and you see them. These are capable, but they travel on ground
Mhm.
and the whole road is covered with,
Yeah.
to the point of causing traffic accidents.
Another interesting thing in the Revelation analogy in comparison and contrast is locust heads are considered to be somewhat similar to a horse head. So armies of the Lord and on the horses and all that stuff. But here's another thing with a Joel context. When God describes quote unquote his army in the context of Joel, he describes them as the locusts. He talks about they're going to go through, and when someone tries to pierce them, they don't break, they're not stopped. And so I've heard some people say, oh, that's talking about us as God's army in the future times. People are going to stab us and it's not going to hurt us. And sounds great, but what's actually being said there is that the Lord's army is the bad guys, the army of Syria that God is using to punish his own people in the nation of Judah, and he's equating them to the locusts. This army is going to come in like a swarm of locusts, and they're going to be so many, so amassed, and so in uniform here that they're not going to break ranks. It's not that we as the Lord's army are going to be stabbed and be immortal. It's that in the context of what was immediately happening in the book of Joel, that the king of Judah was turning against God. And so this army of Syria was going to be used to knock him down a peg and humble him before God. And they were going to be like an army of locusts, so big that when anyone tries to pierce through them, the locusts don't break ranks. They are assembled, they are marching in and going to do what they're going to do, so that God could bring about a revival and a restoration. So there's that.
And it says here they are edible.
Hey,
You know, they
there we
are
go.
edible. But it also says that like now they'll use drones. I mean, they use modern day, they use drones to kind of go and do pesticides and break up they lay eggs in the sand and break up their stuff, so I mean, this is an ongoing thing, so it's like I mean, this was no joke.
Oh, no.
I mean, because if we have this much trouble now, if they have this much trouble now having to do all this thing,
I mean, yeah.
imagine it devastating the
Exactly.
area.
And we know what's going to happen this year, where we've got two different groups with two different cycles of locusts re-emerging. They're happening. They're both emerging. Both these groups that are on different cycles happen to be emerging together this same year. So that's going to be kind of interesting. Yeah. So just to clarify one more time, to wrap things up, verse 19, based on the actual Hebrew, reads like this. So the Lord shifted the wind to a very strong sea wind, not west wind, sea wind, which picked up the locust and blew, not drove them toward, not into the Red Sea or Boundary Sea. So the Lord shifted the wind to a very strong sea wind, which picked up the locusts and blew them toward the Boundary Sea. And not one locust was left in all the territory of Egypt. So this picture makes perfect sense with what the Bible just said and what God did. Last thought from David Roll on this. So in early spring, vast swarm of locusts sweeps up the Nile Valley, consuming all before it. The brand new crops from Thebes and the river fine water basin there wiped out. So the air is heavy with foreboding amongst the people here. Animals are agitated and distressed. Imagine this. The people sense something even more terrible is about to happen. This was plague 8, so we're about to get to plague 9. Next week, we'll pick up with the slides from Brother Maney on this. But any final reactions, thoughts, or questions on the locusts? Really appreciate your interactions and contributions. Good stuff. So we'll stop our screen share here, and we will stop recording and get ready to go before the Lord in song.